Yo, what is going on, Comfy Gang? It's your boy Comfy Neat here. So for today's video, I wanted to change things up and make a little bit more of a positive video this time because, well, I guess my last few videos, well, I always say this, but have been pretty depressing. And I guess being a NEET isn't all doom and gloom in my opinion. I think there are some positive aspects to it. So basically, I want to make this video a quote unquote the many lessons that I've learned while being NEET video, where I talk about some of the more, I guess, positive realizations that I've come through while being a NEET. But I realized that it could probably take me, several, probably at least 15 to 20 minutes per lesson. So instead, I decided to make, individual videos for each of these sorts of like epiphanies that I've come to while being a NEET. And I'm not saying that you have to be a NEET to come to any sort of like realization, let alone the ones that I'll probably be talking about from time to time, but rather that I think being NEET is conducive to, figuring out some things, at least in my case. So yeah, with that said, the lesson which I want to talk about today is basically this realization that it's okay to be a loser, it's okay to be deviant, it's okay to be different, strange, an outcast, weird, and all these sorts of terms that are encompassed by the term loser, because yeah, in my opinion, well, I'll get into that in a bit. But anyways, this is a lesson that I think some people are forced to learn by circumstance. So I guess people that are born, severely mentally ill, autistic, or ugly, or just straight up, genetic trash in multiple different ways. Sometimes, bad environment, getting bullied, how late growth spurt can also lead to these things happening. Or lead to these person living conditions which force them to come to this realization, although a lot of the time they also don't, and end up hating themselves for not conforming and fitting in and all that. And in my case, I was more like a normal fag, for most of my life, although I was like on like the lower, basically like failed normie tier of an individual, where I was like just barely scraping by. I had just barely enough to be considered a normie. I had a friend group, and I, went through all the way from kindergarten to high school, and like 2-3 years of university. And, this whole time I was just, doing whatever, people said was best for me, living the sort of like cookie cutter, like textbook, way of life. And that whole time, yeah, I was one of the things that consumed me was this thought that I needed to get better, be different. I needed to not be a loser, and I constantly beat myself up about not being for not being successful, for being a loser. And I also constantly fantasized about being successful, being being like the people that I've seen in like TV or media, or like the more successful people around me. But yeah, ultimately that never really happened. And then I was forced into to NEETdom, and I was then forced to confront a lot of these feelings head on, because, well, when you're NEET, you're basically the biggest loser in the world according to society, which is not necessarily an unwarranted view of things. I think in some cases that can be true, but at the same time, it just felt like I was constantly beating myself up, about certain things. And, past a certain point, I was unhappy a lot of the time. And I sort of realized that a lot of this happiness, that I'm feeling is, coming from myself, and the fact that I've internalized a lot of ideas, specifically two things: what it means to be successful, and what it means to be normal. And instead, because I haven't met these sorts of like ideals from like either two like of these things, then basically that I was a loser, and that I was like unworthy of feeling any sort of happiness and contentment, and that I should just wallow in misery and self-hatred and pity. And I think that ultimately did me no good, because I'm not saying that you shouldn't improve as a person or pursue things, but ultimately what I'm trying to get at is that you should really be pursuing things. You know, if you're genuinely unhappy in your current position, then yeah, sure, you should be trying to change that. But if you are able to find some sort of contentment and happiness, then I think that you shouldn't, you know, be motivated to do other things just because of other people's beliefs. Like, if all the shame that you feel and all the bad emotions that you feel are coming from what other people are, you know, saying about you or saying about the things you enjoy, then I think all that stuff is ultimately worthless. And I think that's the primary point of this video, is sort of like address these sorts of like you know, these self-hating you know, beliefs that I feel like a lot of people are probably subject to, and to make people realize that a lot of these things are, you know, probably, you know, a lot of the pain that people experience is actually, you know, at their own hands, and specifically from the sort of like their own internal monologue, and from them internalizing a lot of, you know, beliefs about what it means to be a person, what it means to be normal, what it means to be successful, in order to avoid being quote unquote weird, a loser, a deviant, strange, an outcast. And yeah, in my opinion, it's perfectly okay to be all these things for, I think, two primary reasons, which I'll talk about, you know, right now. So basically, the first thing is, the first reason it's okay to be weird is that, you know, all these sorts of, it's the first thing is like this idea of what it means to be successful, and that, you know, this threshold of success is, you know, it's basically, in a nutshell, you know, there seems to be certain milestones, certain thresholds that, you know, people need to meet in order to be considered quote unquote successful in life. And you know, these are tied to things like, there are probably like multiple like parallel like hierarchies and things that you need to pursue in order to be considered successful. And then when you have like a certain amount of each, like think of them as like stats in like a video game. Like if you have like a C in like all the stats, then you're like, you hit this tier of success, this threshold of success. And then, but then there's like a almost like endless amount of different like layers and like thresholds of success that people you know, are expected to meet. And the moment you hit one, you get to like revel in contentment for a bit of time. But then, you know, eventually through exposure to things like social media and Hollywood and books and whatever, and all these sorts of like other external sources of information, you suddenly feel, you know, compelled to pursue that next threshold. And all of a sudden everybody above you seems way more successful. And it also explains a lot of ugly behaviors like downward social comparison and Schadenfreude, because it's like you're trying to compare yourself to other people down below and put them down and all that stuff in order to make yourself feel better about not meeting these sorts of like thresholds, arguably arbitrary at times. Although I think there's an objective component to it, like there's an objective component to it, but yeah, like you beat yourself up for not meeting these thresholds of success, and basically it makes you both act you know, more cruel and more judgmental to other people below you, and it also makes you judgmental and cruel towards yourself, and contemptful and envious of people above you. And the point is that whether you're a wagey or a wage cuck or a feckless NEET, I think that like ultimately, yeah, like it's just pointless. There's always going to be people who mog you, that, you know, make you look like complete trash in comparison to yourself. A lot of the times the you know, the amount of skill involved in, you know, something like a guitar, for example, or sports is like, it's not linear, but it's exponential. So the higher up in terms of like percentages you go, and like if you're like in the top 5, someone who's in like in the top 1% of a certain pursuit is probably hundreds of times better than the person who's in the top 5%, who's like who's thousands of times better than someone who is in like the bottom 50%. So it just goes to show that there's such a huge, you know, skill level difference between people, and that ultimately yeah. So with that said, I think firstly it's probably unrealistic to compare yourself to people above yourself, just because there are things like genetics and the Pareto distributions at play, where basically like 80% of the talent, or positive genetics, are possessed by 20% of individuals in society, and this is just immutable fact. It's persisted in all, it persists in all different like populations like of organisms, and it also exists in even things like all the mass in the universe is like contained in like 20% of like the cosmic bodies, stars, planets, star systems, and the rest is distributed among like the remaining 8%. So yeah, obviously there's always going to be that aspect to it where like yeah, you're never going to be able to measure up. So it's really pointless comparing yourself, because in some sense you'll always feel like a loser. And the next thing is that in order to feel any sort of genuine like happiness and satisfaction in life, I think you have to be okay with this idea of being a loser, with being inhabiting the bottom rungs of society, because for the longest time I wasn't okay with this, and I feel like it caused me a lot of undue suffering, when in reality like sorry, my stomach is kind of like upset at the moment, but like yeah, like if you're okay with being like the word, I'm not saying you have to be this way, and I'm not saying you have to like stoop down that low, but if you're okay with being in a lesser position than you currently are, like let's say if you're like a wage cuck, but you would be okay with the idea of being a NEET, living in your parents' basement and not doing shit with their life, if you could even fathom feeling contentment from that, or living a way which you consider worse off, then chances are you're probably capable of achieving contentment and happiness in whatever sphere of life, or sphere of existence you currently inhabit. And oh fuck, I'm sorry, I just ate actually. So but yeah, like obviously there are exceptions to everything, and like let's say if you're like in the really bottom rungs of society, let's say you're like lolcow, like Christian Weston Chandler like tier of an individual, or like Cyrax, like I think he's like the next Chris Chan, or all these like JFS Cobra, like all these sorts of like lolcows, then, or like you just gigantic, like you're inviting all this negativity into your life, and you're probably shitty to other people, and you're just like you're engaging a lot of like self-harm, then yeah, I do believe that in some case that shame can be good, because it can be warranted. Not good all the time, but like a little bit good, because if you're really like to that extent, then yeah, sure. But I think if you're like anything above that, like then, and you're not like harming others and yourself, then in my opinion, I think whatever sphere of existence is perfectly okay. And that yeah, so if you're okay with like being the worst loser in the world, if you're okay with having nothing, then it really makes life more enjoyable, because then you suddenly become content with the things you currently have. So that's the first aspect of being a loser, which I think needs to be addressed. And the second aspect is this idea that being quote unquote normal, being quote not weird, also has to do with like things like engaging in socially acceptable behaviors. Again, there are exceptions to this rule, like behaviors that directly result in like the severe harm of other people. Like everything you do is going to harm somebody at some point, no matter what it is. But when I'm talking about things like assaulting people on the street, physical violence, being a serial killer, being a pedophile, or watching things like snuff and CP that result in the harm of other people, then yeah, sure, I think in that case you should probably be shamed and ostracized for that, you should probably feel pretty shitty about that. But when it comes to things like any other hobby, then yeah, I think they're perfectly fine, because for a long time I used to be really ashamed of my predisposition towards liking things like video games and anime. And you know, I was probably always predisposed to be this sort of like nerdy person with like weird, you know, interests. But then, you know, for especially when you go into adolescence, you kind of become more socially conscious as a person, more conscious of what other people think and do. And, you know, you have this sort of like desire to fit in. And a lot of times it never goes away for people, at least for me, but I'm pretty sure it's like this for a lot of people. And it never truly goes away, in fact. But yeah, like, so like I would do things in secret. I wouldn't really talk about the things that I genuinely enjoy liking. And, you know, yeah, like, so yeah, for a long time I was like pathetic, like normal fag who, yeah, was ashamed of anime and stuff and all those sorts of things. But over time I realized that, and I even got to the point where like I was, you know, putting myself down in my own head for liking these things, like, you know, saying like self-deprecating, like self-hating thoughts like, oh, like I'm fucking childish for liking this shit, oh, I'm such a degen. Like now I say it ironically kind of, but for a long time I like genuinely believe that like I was just like fucking weird, and like why can't I just like EDM like all the other fucking millennials? Why can't I like you know, this and that? And like, but over time I realized that yeah, it's like, you know, all people's, you know, preferences are entirely arbitrary, and for the vast majority of the time they are you know, probably determined by a select few people. What is considered in vogue, popular, is determined by a select few people in society, namely the attractive and the extremely wealthy or influential. And you know, the things that they do, people automatically do because they want to fit in with these people. Like think about fashion, for example. Like you could have me dripped out in the most fucking like expensive Balenciaga fucking, I don't know, like puffer jacket and Tom Ford, not fucking Tom Ford, like I don't fucking know what guys wear nowadays, like a Gucci, all these sorts of like brand name shit. You could put that on someone like me, or some, even worse, someone like fucking like some hideous like troglodyte of a human being. And you know, you could get fucking some male model, like I don't know, like who else, like Justin Bieber or whoever like women like nowadays, fucking One Direction, fucking K-pop, K-Chad, and put them in fucking like a Walmart fucking Joe Fresh t-shirt, and all of a sudden that Joe Fresh t-shirt would become popular and start getting scalped by scalpers and being sold for hundreds of dollars. Meanwhile, your Balenciaga jacket would probably just become out of fashion and tacky and outdated. And yeah, so the point is that a lot of what is popular is firstly really, really arbitrary, and in a lot of cases, and secondly, you know, it changes like probably every, you know, trends change pretty much every year, in fact, and the broader trends change every 5 to 10 years. So it's like constantly you're gonna be if you want to fit in with other people and be normal, you're gonna have to be playing this constant game of catch up and trying to live up to these expectations. And a lot of the times you'll be doing things and buying things and consuming things and then convincing yourself that these things are worthwhile and that you actually enjoy them, trying to lie to yourself and convince yourself that you enjoy these things, that they're actually like, oh yeah, they're pretty good, oh yeah, and then you're like trying to like do mental gymnastics to convince yourself that you like these things, when in reality, deep down, this whole time you secretly wanted to do something else this entire time, play video games, do this and that, play some obscure sport, or you know, play something that's, you know, out of fashion. And yeah, when in reality this whole time you probably could have been doing just that and you know, experiencing some, you know, genuine form of happiness, while this whole time instead you were engaging self-deception. And then when the self-deception continues, you slowly lose your sense of self and you lose touch with who you are as a person deep down, and all of a sudden you become this sort of like trend chaser, bandwagoner, which I guess like most normies are, to be honest. I was and probably still am to an extent, but yeah, like since it's so arbitrary, you're like, you could either pursue what other people want and maybe hope, because there is going to be that period of time where what you like intrinsically aligns with what other people like and it's in fashion, but then for the vast majority of the time that's not going to be the case. So instead, I think you should do what's genuinely happy, do what genuinely makes you happy, and learn to ignore what other people think, then you know, pursue what other people like at the expense of your denying yourself of what you truly enjoy. Because ultimately the difference between the two things is that in one case you're genuinely happy, versus in the other case you are, you know, lying to yourself and engaging in self-deception. So I think as far as hobbies go, like, and being weird, like, yeah, so things like video games, anime, you know, they used to be considered really niche, nerdy activities, but nowadays it's becoming more and more popular. And in all honesty, like, all these things that are, you know, it's probably going to have its time in the spotlight. I think it is currently having its beginning to become. Video games are already pretty mainstream and popular and arguably ruined because of that. But the other thing is like anime, which is becoming more and more, I think it's starting to come into the spotlight more. So that's something I'm happy about. And I guess, well, that's another topic for another time, whether that's a good thing or not. But yeah, anyways, so there's that. And also I'm not saying that, you know, popular things are bad by definition. I think some things are worthwhile. But then, you know, at the end of the day, if you, you know, some people might try and make the argument that, you know, anime is pointless because you're watching a bunch of imaginary, you know, people engage in imaginary activities. They're just lines on a page being animated in digital form, and you know, it's all escapism, it's all fake and unrealistic. And for video games, it's like, oh, video games is stupid because you're just mashing your fingers into a controller or a keyboard and a mouse, and in order to make pixels dance across the screen, in order to achieve all these sorts of virtual arbitrary goals, in order to you know, give your sense a false sense of achievement in order to stimulate dopamine. So if you characterize like activities like that, for example, in that way, then yeah, they're like, anime and video games are pretty stupid. But you could do the exact same thing to a lot of hobbies that normies or normal fags consider you know, popular. Like, let's say watching sports, which is considered way more socially acceptable, especially to boomers, but even, you know, people, a lot of people still, like, that's considered normal. But if you think about it, what does sports really accept? You know, watching sports really accept basically, you know, fawning over and giving your attention to, you know, depictions of, you know, virtual depictions of, you know, televised depictions of, not depictions, but televised imagery of, you know, Chad's top 0.1% genetic beasts, you know, the cream of the crop of humanity, you know, Giga Chad specimens, engaging in incredibly homoerotic activities, which involve, you know, handling scrotum-shaped objects, like a lot of balls. That's pretty funny, right? How a lot of sports involve balls, and with other phallic objects like bats, rods, sticks, rackets, or their hands. So they're like cupping balls with their hands and throwing them into holes, stuffing them into holes, you know, brushing up and wrestling each other and smashing their big sweaty muscles against each other in some dance, some artificial ritual of you know, of sport, in order to display dominance and hyper masculinity and against each other in order to display their genetic superiority over each other, so then they can then use that to milk people of money like you who watch sports, and also use that status to have sex with the most attractive women in the world, you know, many of which who you could never even dream of having sex with because they're so attractive. And meanwhile, you worship these men as gods, and you fawn over them, and, you know, like, and watch them with your jaws gaped open like some soy jack emoji while stroking yourself because it gets you so hard, and how genetically superior these people are to you as you engage in the ultimate act of cuckoldry in existence. Like, obviously, if you characterize, and obviously I don't mean that, like, I enjoy watching like MMA and sports, but I'm just trying to make the point that if you characterize any sort of activity in that light, then yeah, like, everything like seems absurd and stupid. But that's because the vast majority of copes are inherently absurd in themselves. Everything is a cope, everything is escapism, you know. Even sports, playing sports, like, it's like a game of make pretend, of you know, make believe, because all that stuff is important. It's an important part of coping with the meaninglessness of existence. And yeah, like, but ultimately human beings are absurd, humanity is absurd, existence itself is absurd. So yeah, I think that when you really break, you know, things down, like, none of these hobbies are really better than each other. Obviously, you know, some might lead to more physical fitness, some might sharpen your mind more, some might give you more enjoyment, you know, some require hard work, some don't. But the point is that all these sorts of like activities are ultimately, you know, they're not better than each other. So I'm not trying to get people to shame each other in the way I just did, you know, to sports, but instead to basically make it so that people are more understanding of, you know, other people's interests and hobbies, and stop trying to force their aesthetic preferences onto other people. Because at the end of the day, you know, there's 8 billion people, and given the sheer genetic variety out there, you know, no one is going to have the exact same interests and, you know, predispositions and everything. And yeah, but, you know, since that's never going to happen because of human nature, I think instead the one thing that you do have control of is basically over your own feelings and thoughts, and your ability to, whether you internalize or don't, like, all these sorts of like, you know, these sort of like shaming language regarding like video games, and, you know, like, oh, you're a man child because you play video games in your 30s. Like, who the fuck cares? Like, if you enjoy that shit, then, you know, just play it. Like, and like, yeah, like, if you enjoy anime, just watch anime. If you enjoy sports, if you like, obviously the only exceptions to this are activities, I forget if I mentioned this or not, that, you know, lead to the harm of other people. Like, for example, pedophilia, or being a serial killer, assaulting, just wanting to get into like stupid bar fights all the time, or like, you know, watching CP or snuff. Like, obviously that is wrong and, you know, shouldn't be pursued. But I think anything other than that, like, I think it's perfectly okay. And that, you know, yeah, we should just learn to, you know, the one thing that we do have control over is whether we internalize a lot of the shaming language, you know, around certain, you know, hobbies or whatever. Because if you can learn to reject that, then you could, in a way, probably find a lot of meaningfulness and happiness in a lot of different pursuits, instead of just, you know, having this sort of looming thought over your head that, oh, what I'm doing isn't worthwhile because, you know, society tells me it isn't worthwhile. I think, obviously, strike a balance, especially if you have to do things to survive. But at the end of the day, like, beyond that, what your free time is, you know, yours to do with, I mean, you can basically do whatever you want with your free time. So just do that, you know, do the things that actually make you happy, versus, you know, trying to fit in and not be weird. So in that sense, I think it's also okay to be a loser, reject, weirdo. So yeah, that's basically the crux of this video, those 2 points. So anyways, I hope, and obviously this message doesn't just apply to NEETs, but also, you know, lower tier wage cucks, higher tier wage cucks, successful people, unsuccessful people. I think anybody can benefit from the sorts of things that I've talked about, or at least I hope it does benefit some people. So anyways, hopefully you guys found this entertaining and enjoyable. And yeah, anyways, yeah, I'm gonna end the video here because it's 30 minutes. So this is Company signing out, and peace.